We always see the polished version, right? The rallies, the speeches, the final vote count. But have you ever thought that maybe the real action, the stuff that really changes things, is happening somewhere we don't see it behind closed doors?
It's like a whole different world, isn't it?
Exactly. And that's what we're going to explore today. We're going deep inside the 2020 election, looking at all the behind-the-scenes battles and surprises. And to help us do that, we've got some amazing insights from Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes. They wrote Fight Inside, The Wildest Battle for the White House. And they did this really interesting YouTube interview about the book. So we're going to be pulling from that too.
It's going to be fun. We're basically going on a mission here to uncover what was really going on within the Democratic Party during that whole crazy election. And we're especially interested in what was happening with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. You know, all the doubts, the strategies, the big turning points that nobody really talked about publicly.
Yeah, like the stuff that wasn't in the headlines every day. And it's important because all of that behind-the-scenes stuff ultimately affects the choices that end up in front of us as voters.
Right. It's all connected.
So let's rewind a bit before we get to that super awkward debate moment with Joe Biden. You know, the one where he said beat Medicare. What was the vibe like before that? Were people already whispering about whether he was really up for a second term? I mean, publicly his campaign was all like, Biden's got this, but what was the feeling behind the curtain?
Well, that's where things get interesting, right? You've got this super confident public image, but then you start to hear these little stories, these moments that make you wonder if everything was quite as smooth as they were saying. And the authors of the book, they actually point out that even though Biden's closest aides weren't like openly expressing doubts about his ability to go up against Trump again, there were definitely some things that raised eyebrows.
Okay, so like what kind of moments made people think, maybe things aren't perfect in Biden land?
Well, there's this one story about Eric Swalwell. You remember him? He ran against Biden in the primaries anyway, apparently at some congressional picnic. Biden straight up didn't recognize him.
Oh, no.
And it's not like this was presented as just a one-time slip-up. The authors talk about other unflattering moments, too, things that kind of hint at a disconnect between the image the campaign was putting out and what some people were seeing with their own eyes.
That's so interesting. You know, it's like when you see a picture-perfect couple on Instagram, but then you hear a rumor that they're actually in couples therapy. It makes you think twice.
Right. It's like, are we getting the whole story?
Exactly. So we've got this gap between the carefully crafted image and what some insiders are observing, and then boom, the debate happens and Biden drops that beat Medicare line. It felt like the ground shifted in that moment, like everybody watching knew something had just changed.
Oh, totally. It was one of those things where you couldn't spin it, you couldn't explain it away. It was just a straight up gaffe. And the authors of the book, they really emphasize how undeniable it was. 15 seconds, and the whole narrative around Biden's candidacy seemed to take a hard turn.
And what's crazy is that this all went down while Nancy Pelosi, one of the most powerful people in the Democratic Party, was watching the debate alone. And her reaction was very telling.
Her reaction is super important because, remember, she was the one who actually advised Biden not to debate Trump in the first place, which kind of suggests that maybe she already had some concerns about how he'd perform. So when that beat Medicare line came out, you can just imagine the alarm bells going off in her head. And according to the book, that sense of panic spread through the entire Democratic Party. Like wildfire, people were texting back and forth, freaking out. The book uses words like disillusionment, concern, fear to describe the mood.
Wow, fear of what were they so scared of?
All right, so this is where it gets really interesting. The main fear, according to someone who talked to Pelosi that night, was that the party would overreact to Biden's stumble. They were worried that everyone would freak out and pressure him to drop out so fast that Kamala Harris would basically become the nominee by default. And it's pretty clear from the book that Pelosi herself wasn't convinced that Harris was ready to be president at that point.
So it wasn't just about Biden messing up. It was about who would take his place and what that would mean for the party's chances of winning. It shows you how much strategy goes on behind the scenes. It's like a game of chess.
Totally. And it wasn't just Pelosi who was thinking strategically. Obama was in the mix, too. The book says that both of them preferred an open primary if Biden decided to step down.
So like a do-over?
Kind of, yeah. And they actually talked to each other about it. Plus, the book goes into detail about Pelosi having these direct conversations with Biden himself about all of this, which makes you realize just how much influence these two figures had.
And it makes sense, right? If you're not totally sold on the front runner and you have the power to change things up, an open primary gives you more control. It's like hitting the reset button.
Exactly. And you can see why they might have been hesitant about Harris taking over, even though she was the vice president. Maybe they saw her as a riskier bet and they wanted to keep their options open.
It's fascinating to think about all the calculations that go into these decisions. It's like this whole hidden world of strategy and power. And the authors make this really interesting point about how what politicians say publicly to voters is often very different from what they're actually thinking and doing in private.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge takeaway from this whole thing. It's like we're getting this glimpse behind the curtain and we're seeing all the anxieties and the maneuvering that usually stays hidden from view.
It makes you wonder how much we're really told versus how much is kept secret.
It really makes you think.
And speaking of things kept quiet, a lot of that private anxiety seemed to be focused on Kamala Harris. The book is very upfront about the fact that a lot of people within the Democratic Party, including big names like Obama and Pelosi, had serious doubts about whether she could actually win a general election.
Yeah, they don't sugarcoat it at all. They even quote people who are very, very close to Obama saying that he just didn't believe Harris could win.
That's pretty blunt.
It is. And it wasn't just a feeling they had. Apparently, there was this whole low-key effort to see if there was support for someone else besides Harris to run if Biden stepped down.
So they were actively looking for a backup plan.
It seems that way. And on top of that, some of the big donors were also expressing their doubts about Harris to Obama and Pelosi. So that added another layer of pressure to the situation.
Wow. So even though in public, everyone was all about party unity behind the scenes, there was this whole undercurrent of doubt about Harris's ability to win and to make things even more complicated. The book says that Biden's team actually worked to undermine Harris internally. Why would they do that? It seems so risky.
Well, the book lays out their logic, and it makes sense in a way. After that debate, when everyone thought Biden did badly, the calls for him to drop out started to get louder, right? So his team basically started telling important donors that if they pushed Biden out, they'd end up with Harris as president, and they reminded them of all the doubts about whether she could actually win.
So they were using the fear of Harris losing to protect Biden.
Exactly. It was a way to shut down any talk of replacing him, and the authors even mentioned that there are emails and stuff that could back up these claims.
That's wild.
Yeah.
It also makes Pelosi and Obama's preference for an open primary make even more sense if Biden did step down. They probably wanted a way to avoid having Harris automatically become the nominee. Seems like they're trying to control the situation as much as possible.
Oh, absolutely. Given how politics works, it would have been super unusual for the party to just skip over the sitting vice president if the president stepped down. So Biden's team undermining Harris becomes a key part of his strategy to stay in the game. It's all about controlling the narrative and influencing the people who make the big decisions.
It's like a political thriller playing out in real life, and then there's this really tense moment described in the book when Biden finally decides to drop out. And he has to tell Harris that he's endorsing her. It reveals a lot about their relationship.
No, it's a super revealing scene when Biden tells Harris he's out. She immediately asks him to publicly endorse her right then and there because she knows that if he doesn't, it opens up the possibility of a contested convention, which would be a total mess. It could have been super chaotic and unpredictable. And the book actually talks about multiple phone calls between them about this endorsement. And it suggests that Biden's ego might have been a factor in why he didn't immediately give her his full support.
It's amazing how often ego seems to be at the heart of these political dramas. And then there's that whole no daylight rule that Biden apparently imposed on Harris after he dropped out. What did that mean for her campaign?
This is where the book gets really insightful about the challenges Harris was facing. So even after Biden was out of the race, he told Harris that she couldn't have any daylight between her positions and his nature. Basically, she couldn't disagree with him on anything, which really limited her ability to run her own campaign and set herself apart from Biden.
That sounds incredibly frustrating, especially if she needed to reach voters who weren't already on board with Biden's agenda.
Exactly. And the authors even point out this moment where Biden calls Harris kid on the day of her debate with Mike Pence, which kind of highlights the power dynamic between them. It was clear that Harris needed to create her own identity to appeal to a wider range of voters, but this no daylight rule totally prevented her from doing that. She was stuck between being loyal to Biden and doing what she needed to do to win.
It's like being trapped in a political catch-22. And it wasn't just the policy stuff. The book also talks about the problems Harris had with the campaign staff she inherited from Biden.
Yeah, right. She basically had to work with a lot of Biden's people. And the book says that her own team often felt like they were playing second fiddle to the Biden loyalists. They even have a whole chapter in the book that hints at this tension. And you can imagine how that kind of environment could lead to leaks and backstabbing, which would make it even harder for Harris to build momentum.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster. So what about Harris's team themselves? Did they think they had a real shot at winning?
Well, according to the book, there was a big disconnect between what they were telling themselves and what actually happened. Tim Walz, who is part of the campaign, he's quoted as saying that he always felt like they were behind and needed to take more risks. But the overall message within the campaign was that they were doing great. The authors even used the word gaslit to describe this, like they were being manipulated into believing they had a better chance than they actually did.
So election night must have been a huge shock for them.
Now, total shock. The book describes this scene at the Mayflower Hotel where Harris's team was gathered as the results came in, and you can just feel the disbelief and devastation, especially from Tim Walz. It's clear that they were completely blindsided by the outcome. It shows how out of touch they were with what was really happening out there.
It's a reminder that the internal stories of campaigns can be very different from what we see on the surface. And it's not just the Biden-Harris stuff that's interesting. The authors also give us some glimpses into the Trump campaign and even hint at some bad blood between Biden and Pelosi.
Oh, yeah, we've been focused on the Democrats, but the book also gives you perspectives from inside the Trump world, which helps you understand the bigger picture. And yeah, there's a story about Biden apparently saying he would never forgive Nancy Pelosi for pushing him to think about dropping out.
Wow, so even after the election is over, there's still drama.
It's like a never-ending soap opera.
It really is. So for everyone listening, as you've followed along on this deep dive into Fight Inside, what are the big things you're taking away about the 2020 election?
I think the book does a great job of showing us just how much conflict and maneuvering was going on within the Democratic Party leading up to the election. It lays bare all the doubts that key people had about Biden's stamina and Harris's ability to win, and we've seen how those doubts led to secret strategies, power plays, and even attempts to undermine a sitting vice president. It proves that the road to the White House is never simple or straightforward.
It's like that saying, the sausage gets made, but instead of sausage, it's the President of the United States.
Exactly. And the process isn't always pretty.
It really makes you realize that what we see in public is often just a carefully constructed facade, and the real story is much more complex and maybe even a little bit messy. So why should we care about all this? Why does it matter that we understand these hidden dynamics?
Because once you understand how the game is really played, you can be a smarter, more informed voter. You can see past the spin and the carefully crafted narratives and start to recognize the real factors that influence the choices you get to make on election day.
It's like leveling up your understanding of how politics really works.
Exactly. You're not just taking things at face value anymore. You're thinking critically and you're asking questions.
So here's something to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive. Think about the impact of all this internal party drama and the unspoken concerns that are floating around. How does all of that affect the choices that end up on your ballot, and what does it mean for the future of our political parties when so much of the real action happens behind closed doors? It might be worth thinking about how the media covers these things, too. Do they shed light on what's really going on, or do they just add to the confusion?
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's important stuff, and hopefully this deep dive has given you some new insights to consider.